Hello and welcome to the Know It Some podcast. I'm your host, Steve Platt. If you're new this week, thanks for joining us. We bring you a fresh episode every week with an interview with somebody that we can learn from. I think that we all have different life journeys and perspectives. It's always good to learn a little bit from each other because after all, while no one likes to know it all, it's always good to know it some. This week, my guest is Adam Schick. Adam's voice you might recognize because he is the host of Gator Tales, the official podcast of the Florida Gators athletic department. He gets to interview all sorts of Gator greats, legends past, present, and future on his podcast. It's really incredible what he's done. Throughout the pandemic, he was able to do some really interesting series where he got to interview some past championship teams, both players and coaches, particularly the back-to-back basketball championships. He was able to interview the starting five and Billy Donovan. Did a phenomenal job there. I'm just extremely proud of the work that he's done with Gator Tales and also, you know, the work he's done throughout his career. He's worked for the SEC Network. He's worked for Atlanta United, for Orlando City. Just you know, has a voice for sports, really. And so, without further ado, Adam Schick, episode 6. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm good. This platform is interesting.
The anchor?
Yeah,
You know.
but this is good. This sounds super clear too.
Awesome. That's great to hear. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and kind of talk to us a little bit about your journey. I find it actually pretty fascinating, all the different things that you've done, because you've worked across tons of different mediums. You've been in the podcast world, you've been on television, on radio, and then across a wide spectrum of sports. What was your first draw to broadcasting in general? Like, what was it that got you to be interested in getting into this field?
It's a loaded question. I guess I'd probably say it's, you know, growing up, my dad worked for HBO Sports. So I had the opportunity to go to so many really cool events, mostly big fights in Vegas, because boxing we worked on mostly.
Nice.
And because of that, he worked with a lot of people in the local media that were sports broadcasters that were kind of, you know, big time in Atlanta. And so I was just exposed to a lot of those people. And I think it also, I was pretty insufferable as a kid. I know, because I recently went back and saw part of my bar mitzvah video, and I was able to prove that. But I was really was into acting, was into like performing. I was just very loud, which I'm told I still am today. And at the time it was like, you know, I was really into doing like theater. And then once I got into sports, then it sort of became, oh, this is like a, you know, way to perform,
Right.
but also have sports tied into it, which I was really into because that was my dad's thing, you know? So, I guess it sort of stemmed from that, just the need to. I was always, you know, putting on shows, trying to get microphones. I was just really into being loud and being the center of attention. I think that all kind of contributed to it.
Well, you have the skill set for it. You know, I'm often told I got the face for radio. You have the voice. I'm just kind of marveling at how broad of a spectrum that you've covered, because I took a look over kind of your resume, and, you know, I know that you were the voice for Orlando City and for Atlanta United, so you've done soccer, but I've seen you've done like women's basketball, and you've done, you know, a number of different things. What about sports, you know, did it for you? Because, okay, I understand the broadcasting and you know, that stems from you know, you always kind of acting and being in that field, but I don't know exactly where sports tied in. So did you grow up playing a lot of sports?
I mean, I played like baseball. Interestingly enough, I never played soccer, even though I ended up doing some of my biggest work that I did broadcasting was for soccer.
With soccer.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I remember when I was interviewing for the Orlando City job, I was in the office of the COO at the time, and I was telling him about my background. And he said, so tell me, he said, so you weren't a soccer fan growing up, you've never played soccer. Why should someone like you be the voice of this team? I was
Yeah, it's a
like,
fair question.
it's a fair. I don't know if I had a great answer for it. And I tell you what I said is that I remember what I said is that because soccer was new in the city for a lot of people, and they were going to have to adjust to it as a sort of a someone who was an outsider of the sport as well. I felt like I could convey to
Help
them
bridge
what
that.
was convey to them what was happening as a former neophyte myself. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I would. I mean, I played baseball. Yeah, I always liked sports, but I wasn't necessarily. I wasn't like a very good athlete or anything. I think a lot of it was from my dad. I mean, he was a really good athlete. He
Hmm.
played on his basketball team. He's a great golfer, very very active. So I think part of it was that. And then it's funny too, like talking about things that you transition to sports. I was really into in elementary school. I was really into to WCW
No
because
kidding.
if you think about it, it's sports entertainment. If you're into the flashy side and the over the top theatrics, and then you add sports, that's basically
Right.
that's what you have, right? Is you have professional wrestling. So I think that was sort of the bridge. Is that I got really into pro wrestling, and I was like, let's put on wrestling shows in my basement. I had one of my birthday parties was I was Sting, my dad was Hulk Hogan, and we staged a match in my basement. We had like a king size mattress was the ring. I went to Home Depot and got some poles to create ropes and stuff. So it was
That's
the
awesome.
extension from there was okay. So my dad said, "Well, yeah, Adam. So this stuff is cool, but what about actual sports where the outcome is not predetermined and it isn't scripted?" And so
Right.
then
Yeah, that's a little.
I transitioned into that and started really following the Braves, following the Falcons, then really getting into Gator stuff because that was my dad went to Florida, most of my family went to Florida, and so that was kind of the trigger for me was in getting into college sports, and then I was ready to leave the wrestling and all that stuff behind.
Roger that.
Though
You know,
most of my though I have a few friends who have not left it behind, and I'm supposed to. And apparently WrestleMania is this weekend, and I'm supposed to care, but I still don't.
oh boy. Well, yeah, no, I didn't. I wouldn't have known it was this weekend if you hadn't said anything. To be truthful,
That's what I'm here for.
I grew up. my dad was a big Hulk Hogan fan, so I grew up knowing him and a few of the other greats. But that's pretty interesting. So was there a particular broadcaster then that drew your attention as a kid? Like, do you have any any idols or mentors in that world by any chance?
Yeah, I'd say my biggest mentor in sports broadcasting was a guy named Chuck Dowdle. He was the sports director for the ABC affiliate in Atlanta, and someone again my dad was close to, and so I just became really enamored with him and the work that he did, and just thought it was so cool, and how could I do that? So what I started doing was just trying to basically shadow him in any way that I could. So I was doing, I guess I called them internships, though it was all kind of off the books because you weren't really allowed to do that if you were in high school. Um, but
Right.
for a few summers in high school, I basically just shadowed him, followed him everywhere. It took me into the Braves locker room, and we go to press conferences. And I remember doing NBA draft. I remember interviewing Chris Paul before the draft when he was coming out, and again at the time, I don't think I really recognized the significance of a lot of this stuff. When you're younger, you don't realize
Right.
you're not as starstruck when you're younger because you don't really know what it
You don't
means.
know to be.
You don't know what it means to be famous. You know what I mean? Like you don't know what.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think about. Like my 3-year-old niece could meet someone super famous and it wouldn't mean anything to her because she doesn't understand that concept. Now, I'm not talking
Yep.
about when I was that young, but still, I was just
It didn't
really.
fully dawn on you.
No, it didn't. Yeah, and the people I got exposed to, and the athletes I would spend time with, I didn't really recognize what a big deal that was and how different it was. In terms of what most people in life would recognize as, oh, this is a big deal to be spending time with this person. But for me, that was just what we did, you know?
Yep. Yeah. Once you got to the University of Florida, I was lucky enough to meet you then. I actually worked at WUFT before you came on as an anchor.
Huh.
I was there back when Stuart Weber and those folks were there, on the technical side of things, floor manager and VTR and stuff like that.
Now it's all robots.
Now it's all robots. You don't need people
You don't
anymore.
need people anymore.
But being a Gator fan, being a Gator graduate, coming from a family of Gator graduates, it must have been kind of cool to work with the university again. First of all, covering SEC sports, but then now with Gator Tales. How did Gator Tales come about?
It's funny. So Gator Tales was kind of a random thing. I remember, so when I was working at Florida, when I was in Gainesville working for Florida and doing play-by-play I was doing women's basketball, soccer, and softball primarily. So it was a pretty full schedule from fall through spring and during the athletic year. But again, I was trying to figure out what else can I do here to grow and to try and make more money. Working in sports, it's very hard to make good money. That's kind of a general issue across the board. But you cobble things together, and you add up enough different independent contractor streams, and you submit 25 1099s, and you can make a living doing it. But I would always go every summer. I would sit down with my boss at Florida. And I would say, hey, like, what else can I possibly be doing? Are there any other opportunities? Can we create this type? What if we do these videos you put on the website? And we did a whole series. One of the things that resulted from that was we did a whole series where I tried sports with the team. So I went out to soccer and was trying to be a goalkeeper during a practice and goofy stuff like that. Which never
are those videos available?
I don't know if they still are, but
that's a shame.
I remember the one I remember the most was when I was trying to they were trying to teach me how to play goalkeeper, and it was I couldn't even come close to stopping anything. You think it's easy when you see it. You're like, oh man, it can't be that hard, right? It's super it's super hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But anyway, so I remember sitting down with them and I said, what do you think I could do potentially to do some more? And this was in 2015. He said, it's funny you asked that because I actually was ready for that question, and I can tell you that we have the perfect project for you to launch. He said, I don't know if you're familiar with podcasts, but we're thinking about starting one for the athletic department. And at the time, I had never listened to a podcast before, which is crazy because This is only 6 years ago, and now pretty much all I listen to are podcasts.
Right.
But he said, yeah, we think it'd be cool. Someone in the athletic association, had this idea. And then that was one of the administrators said, hey, my son's listening to a lot of these podcasts. Maybe that's something that we should do. And then that got sent down the line. Ultimately, it gets, they give it to me and say, hey, what do you think about doing this? And I was like, yeah, we could, for sure. And then at that point, I literally went home and started listening to Serial, which was the big thing at the time, the first season of Serial. And I was like, okay, I sort of get this format. And then we just kind of went in, just blind and kind of learned as we went along. And this was in the fall of 2015. So it was also fortunate that it timed up with kind of a resurgence of football, right? That was when Jim McElwain had the Gators going to the SEC championship back-to-back years. So there were things that were happening that could help kind of propel us and give us some momentum. But no, I just remember trial and error basically as we set the thing up and started going forward with it. And it's crazy. I mean, this week we put out episode 262, and then you start thinking about all the people you've talked to, and then all the time I've spent poring over this audio and and trying to come up with the right guests for each week. And you take a step back, and it's kind of crazy to look at the big picture. But again, when you're in the middle of it, you don't think about that giant scope. Right. But then you're like, oh wow, it's been going on for 6 years. Format is changed a number of different ways, and I think now we're at a really good spot where it's a really conversational show. That's what I think. The early thing that I did is I was trying to stuff everything in it like it was a I don't know, like a an audio episode of Sports Center. Like, let's get a 3-minute thing with this person, and then let's have 5 minutes with this guy, and and then we're gonna have some clips from interviews and press conference stuff and highlights, and it was so busy that it kind of took me
At first.
Yeah, it kind of took me out of it when I would listen to it. It just felt like it was kind of it was just too much. And I started thinking about the podcast that I like to listen to, and I think it's partly just because I'm not a great listener, and I don't learn well that way. So like if there's a lot going on and it's busy, it doesn't necessarily grab me, and I'll get kind of lost. So I started paring it down and said, okay, what if we make this more about long form conversations? And we don't just have on athletes and say, let's talk about this weekend's game, talk about that catch, but let's talk to people, right? Let's learn more about the people that are behind the athletes. And as a result, I think we found a lot of really cool stories that you just wouldn't hear otherwise. So I think it's the way the show has evolved today to be very much about telling stories that no one else really tells. That's what I think is compelling about it, because there's a million Gator podcasts on there that are out there, and there's only one that's doing what we're doing, which is really spending time with the coaches and the athletes, and digging deep to find out what are they really about and what drives them.
Yeah, I mean, even during the pandemic, you were asking some great questions about what they're watching on Netflix, and who they wouldn't want to be quarantined with on the team, kind of.
That's my favorite question. That's my favorite question, and the responses we gotten for that are they always have maybe a response for who they would want to be stuck with the whole time, but there's instantly a response when you say, who could you not spend this amount of time with? That always garners a quick answer.
Oh yeah. No, you've done an incredible job with it. You got a great following. I love the format.
Thank you.
But one of my favorite things that you did were those series looking back at past championship runs. The series you did on 2006 was near and dear to me, because if you remember, that was our first year in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you came up with that idea and you started going after those kinds of interviews, I mean, that must have been near and dear to you in terms of your fandom, right? Because even though you're a professional, you're still a Florida Gator fan. So what was it like to have a lot of those conversations with folks like Urban Meyer and some of the athletes that were on those historic teams?
It was really cool, and I'm trying to remember whose idea it was. You know what? Honestly, it was kind of Scott Strickland's idea. Because I usually interview him twice a year, kind of just check-ins on the program. And I want to say it was a couple of years ago when I talked to him, and he's just a super interesting guy. He consumes a lot of content. He has very good taste. I'm not just saying that because he's the athletic director and he's, X steps above the people who pay me to do this job. But
right.
I mean, when I'll have him on and say, what are some things that you're into right now? Like, he's the one who said, oh, you got to watch Ted Lasso. Like, Ted Lasso has been the best thing I've seen in a long time, right?
It's a great show.
Just says, he always has so many good recommendations. And I was asking him, I think it might have been one of the first times I had him on. He's like, you know what? He said, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I don't know if you've ever listened to Business Wars. He said, but it's really cool. They have these, it's just long form storytelling about the history of, Coke versus Pepsi, Hasbro versus Mattel. I don't know why I chose that one it's the one that came to me. But even like Uber versus Lyft, even some newer ones.
Right.
Pulitzer versus Hearst. I mean, it just goes all throughout history. And so so he said, this is just a really cool storytelling format. And it'd be amazing if we could do some of these kind of oral histories, but have it be about some of the Gator championship teams. And I mean, he said that a few years ago. We never did it because I knew it was going to be really hard to do, and then B, it was just a matter of what's the timing for it? When should this be? Because kind of what we really specialize in is week to week, giving people an inside look at the program. And if we spend a few weeks just doing this look back to 15 years ago, what are we sacrificing, right? And what are we not providing as far as content now that people want to know what's going on with the program and staying connected. So when COVID hit, obviously it gave everybody a lot of time to do a lot of things they had been putting off for a long period of time.
Yeah,
and
right.
So
and there wasn't a whole lot
no,
going on.
And there wasn't. And I honestly think that's the reason that it worked. And I mean, I'm still. One of the first interviews I did was with Urban Meyer, and I wasn't even sure he would do it. I was like, oh, why is Urban going to do this? And he was really into it and really enjoyed doing it. And as I talked to more and more people, what I realized is they were enjoying it as much as I was. And the reason for it was that during a time when everything was so abnormal and everyone was forced to kind of hunker down and lead these very basic lives at that point, right? This was connecting people with some of the best moments and memories of their lives, right? So during a time of so much negativity, this was like, let's relive some of the most positive experiences that you've ever had. So that was kind of the driving force. And again, it was just the time, right? We had the time. There weren't going to be any sports going on. There was, a lot of lead time. I knew we were going to have months to put this out without anything really interfering with it as far as real sports coming back. But I mean, the time I spent with people it was fascinating. Not all of it. I talked to Brandon Spikes. I think I talked to him for over an hour across 3 or 4 different phone calls because he kept having to drop to deal with his kids and whatnot. And it was fascinating. It was so funny. I only was able to use like 10 minutes of it because so much of it was inappropriate, but it was really funny. And it was a lot of fun for me, right? Because I remember when 2006, I was a freshman when this stuff was happening.
Did you get him to tell you what he said to Noshan Moreno in that game? Or he's...
I don't think so. I think he talked about it a little bit. I don't know if I got what he said to him. But he was one of the ones that was really interesting. And I am by far the most proud of is the series that we did on the 06, 07, the back-to-back national championship teams. But I never could have imagined that we would be able to get all 5 starters and get Billy. And the stories they told. And the thing that blew me away was just how connected they all were. You never doubted if any of these stories were true because they all recited the same stories. And each one would add another detail. But when you asked what was the best moment here, they always went back to the same things. So I think that's what was so impressive was that that bond between them was so strong. And the memories were so impactful that it's like they had one shared brain.
I mean, and they had to in order to accomplish something so rare.
To be what they were. Yeah. So it gave you a window into how they were so successful as a team because they were so connected. But just to bring it back around to the original question, I'm sorry I rambled, but spending an hour on the phone with Joakim Noah, hearing his story, I mean, that was wild, right? I mean, this was talk about being starstruck and getting these guys. I mean, I'd go to the team, their NBA teams. The NBA team would say, hey, talk to their agent. Then you have to go find their agent, and the agent's got to track them down. And I mean, it was really, really the only way to do it was to have the amount of time that we had without a real set deadline, except get it done before there's football again in September. But it was super hard. Each one of those episodes required probably 5 times as much work as a standard episode of Gator Tales. But it was super
But there was a payoff.
Super rewarding. And to have that and the fact that anyone can go back and hear those stories and anytime they want, to me, that's really powerful.
Yeah, I'll tell you from a fan's perspective, I really, really enjoyed them. They are powerful, and you can tell that there was a lot of tenacity involved in getting all these guys, to be able to give you the time to interview them and to be able to pull out what you were able to pull out of them for these interviews and these episodes. So before I let you go, is there anything big coming down the pipeline for you? Any products that you're currently working on other than Gator Tales?
No, Gator Tails it's the only thing I'm promoting at the moment is Gator Tails. um,
Roger that. Well, I always want to give
no,
the
no,
opportunity.
I
So where
appreciate
can
it.
people find Gator
So
Tales?
Gator Tails can be found really anywhere you get your podcasts, um, and it is the only official podcast of the Gators. So I always try and mention that because again, there's a lot of
Absolutely.
podcasts out there that do a lot of the same thing, which isn't. There's nothing wrong with just doing deep dives on football and recruiting and all of that stuff, but again, we kind of do something different as the official podcast with access that the other people just they don't have the opportunity to get. So I always try and leverage the real benefit that we have by being the internal podcast being run by the athletic association. So no, I mean coming up, I'm actually really excited for in the next few weeks. I'm going to be talking to Becky Burley, who just retired as Florida's
Wow.
only
Yep.
soccer coach in history, and one of the most fascinating people you'll probably ever meet. So I'm really excited to talk to her about her career and what's next. So
No, she's incredible, and they let her go out on a win against Miami. What a way to go out! Just an incredible
yeah, no,
coach. That'll be an episode I
yeah,
gotta
it's gonna be
catch
a
for
fun one.
sure.
It's gonna be a fun one.
I appreciate your time, Adam. I really do. Where can people find you on social media?
Uh, I'm not as interesting as I used to be on social media because I realize my opinions don't really matter that much. But you can find
Uh,
me on Twitter at Adam D. Schick. The D is critical there. Someone else had Adam Schick when I started on Twitter in like 2012, and I don't think they've ever tweeted. It's like someone just squatted on the
they,
account knowing I was about to sign up for Twitter.
that's
So yeah, so
horrible.
as a result, everything is
Oh
I've
boy.
got my everything is just Adam D. Schick. So I always have to, and they have to say it's D as in dog, and then I'm worrying, are people then when I say it's Adam D, are they going to then write the dog if I say that? It's very confusing, but I'm
It
still
is.
upset about
It
the
is.
guy who took Adam Schick and never actually used it for anything. He
He's
really
holding
is.
it
He really
hostage.
is.
Adam D.
Yeah.
Schick on Twitter. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and hopefully have you on
Thank you
again
so much,
sometime.
Steve. Good to talk to you too.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Know It Some podcast. My thanks again to our guest, Adam Schick. And for all you first-time listeners, you could find us on Twitter at Know It Some Pod. Also on Instagram, Know It Some Pod on Instagram as well. I welcome all listener feedback, any ideas for future guests or segments. Just send all of it our way. And if you haven't already, please go on Apple and leave us a review, 5-star ranking. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening in on. And then, when you see our posts, feel free to share those with some friends. The more that we grow this, and the more organically that we grow this, the easier it'll be for us to continue to book some amazing guests and bring you some great content going forward. I appreciate each and every one of you that has already done so. I cannot believe the feedback and the metrics that I'm seeing. But just some great things ahead if we continue to go in the direction we're headed. So thank you again to the entire listener base. New episode every Tuesday. And until next week, thanks for listening.